Hello there, stay a while and listen.
Ancient Greece, a land of towering mountains, deep blue seas, and radiant sunshine, was a civilization that blossomed from the 8th century BCE and left an indelible mark on the world. It was a land of gods, heroes, and philosophers, where the boundaries between myth and reality were often blurred. In the cool shade of olive trees, among the marble pillars of temples, and within the bustling streets of Athens, the Greeks lived their lives guided by a complex blend of reason, ritual, and respect for the divine. One of the most defining features of ancient Greek culture was their polytheistic beliefs, with gods and goddesses that ruled over every aspect of the natural and human world. At the heart of Greek mythology stood the Olympian gods, a pantheon of deities who resided on Mount Olympus, the tallest mountain in Greece. You'd walk through the city, passing majestic statues and temples, the scent of incense wafting through the air as the sounds of the marketplace echo around you. Zeus ruled the heavens and was the god of thunder and justice. His will was believed to shape the cosmos itself. From the weather to the fate of individuals, he was the god who enforced the laws of the universe, ensuring that right and wrong were balanced. The Athenians held Athenians, believing that she guided their city's decisions and prosperity. During the annual Panathenaic festival, the city would honor Athena with grand processions, sacrifices, and athletic competitions. Their divine will governed everything from state affairs to personal relationships, and they were central to religious practices. The Greeks believed that by honoring the gods with sacrifices, prayers, and festivals, they would receive divine favor, ensuring that their lives were prosperous, healthy, and successful. This festival was a blend of religious observance and civic pride, a reminder of the vital role the gods played in their daily lives. These gods were not distant, abstract entities. They were ever-present and deeply involved in the lives of humans, guiding their fates, influencing their decisions, and even engaging in personal relationships with mortals. Imagine yourself in the heart of Athens, a city dedicated to the goddess Athena, the goddess of wisdom, courage, and warfare. At the same time, the influence of Zeus, the king of the gods, was ever present. But the gods weren't all wise and just. Apollo, the god of music, prophecy, and the sun, could be both beneficent and vengeful. His twin sister, Artemis, was the goddess of the hunt, wild animals, and the moon, and she embodied both nurturing and destructive qualities. Ares, the god of war, was revered and feared for his violent nature, while Aphrodite, the goddess of love and beauty, had the power to make anyone fall in love at her will. These gods and their stories, filled with mystery, drama, and human flaws, were woven into every aspect of Greek life.
Like and subscribe. The wizard will bless you.
Greek philosophy, the pursuit of wisdom and understanding. While religion shaped the spiritual life of the Greeks, philosophy began to influence their worldview in profound ways. The ancient Greeks are credited with the birth of Western philosophy, and their intellectual pursuits forever changed how we think about the world, humanity, and our place in it. And Aristotle would engage in conversation with citizens about the nature of truth, justice, and virtue, or what is virtue? His works explored the nature of reality, ethics, politics, and the ideal forms of society. He is best known for his theory of forms, which proposed that the physical world is only a shadow of the true, eternal reality that can only be apprehended through reason. His method, now called the Socratic method, encouraged people to think critically and question their beliefs and assumptions. His contributions to logic, metaphysics, ethics, and natural science laid the groundwork for much of Western thought and were influential for centuries to come. He believed that through dialogue and self-examination, people could achieve greater wisdom and understanding. These thinkers believed that reason and logic were the tools needed to understand the world, and they sought to find meaning and order in human existence. Imagine walking through the Agora of Athens, the bustling marketplace, where philosophers like Socrates, Plato, Socrates, perhaps the most famous of them all, is known for his method of questioning, often asking simple yet profound questions like what is justice? Plato, one of Socrates' students, went on to establish the Academy in Athens, the first institution of higher learning in the Western world. Aristotle, Plato's student, took a more empirical approach, emphasizing observation and experience as the paths to knowledge. The Greeks, particularly in the Golden Age of Athens, believed in the importance of reason and rational thought. They began to see human beings not as subjects at the mercy of divine whims, but as individuals capable of understanding the world and shaping their own destinies. This shift towards individualism and intellectual inquiry was revolutionary, and it laid the foundation for the development of democracy and the rule of law. Daily life in ancient Greece. From olive oil to athletics now, let's step away from the world of gods and philosophy for a moment and enter the more mundane but equally fascinating world of everyday life in ancient Greece. Life in ancient Greece was governed by a variety of factors, including the seasons, the Olympic Games, and the role of the family. The ancient Greek diet was simple but nourishing, based around bread, olives, and wine. Men were responsible for the public life, while women's roles were more centered on the home and raising children. A Greek woman's life was largely confined to the domestic sphere, though some women, especially those in more powerful families, could wield significant influence. Olive oil was central to Greek cuisine, used not only in cooking, but also in religious rituals and as a form of currency. The Greeks believed that olive trees were a gift from the goddess Athena, and thus olive oil was considered sacred. These plays were often performed as part of religious festivals, blending entertainment with devotion and reflection on human nature, fate, and morality. The family unit was the cornerstone of Greek society, though it was structured around patriarchy. The Greeks also enjoyed a variety of public entertainments. From theatre to athletics, the Olympic Games, held every 4 years in Olympia, were the most important of these events. These games celebrated physical prowess and honored Zeus, the king of the gods. Athletes competed in a range of sports, including running, wrestling, and chariot racing. Victory in the Olympics was considered one of the highest honors a Greek man could achieve. Theatres across Greece staged dramatic performances of tragedy and comedy, with playwrights like Sophocles, Euripides, and Aristophanes shaping the development of Greek drama. Reflecting on the Greek legacy, as we step away from the bustling agora of ancient Athens, it is clear that the legacy of ancient Greece is not just confined to the temples and the gods. It is the foundation of much of Western thought, philosophy, and democracy. The contrast between divine influence and human reasoning is a theme that runs throughout Greek history, just as the balance between the physical world and the metaphysical world of the gods is ever present in their stories. The Greeks blended their rich mythology and deep spirituality with their intellectual pursuits, creating a culture where reason, religion, and art all coexisted. Whether it was through religious rituals, athletic competitions, or intellectual debate, the Greeks placed great value on the idea of public life, the shared experience that defined them as citizens, as intellectuals, and as a civilization. The Olympian gods were central to everyday life, providing both guidance and consequence. But it was the philosophers who helped shift the human perspective from divine determinism to a worldview that prized human reason and individual agency. As we reflect on their daily lives, we also see the importance of community in Greek society. If you've enjoyed exploring ancient Greece, consider subscribing. Slavery. Role of women, however, women had fewer rights. They were generally confined to the domestic sphere, especially among the elite, and marriages were often arranged by their fathers. The most famous example of an intellectual woman in Athens was Aspasia, a woman who was known for her intellectual prowess and was the companion of the statesman. Aspasia is believed to have played a role in the intellectual and political circles of Athens, and some accounts suggest she even influenced Pericles' policies, but their roles in religion were also limited compared to men. They could serve as priestesses, and some deities, such as Demeter, the goddess of the harvest, had female-centered cults. The most important religious festival for women in Athens was the Thesp, a festival dedicated to Demeter and her daughter Persephone, where women participated in fertility rites to ensure a successful harvest. Ancient Greece, philosophy, art, and architecture, and the wizard will continue to guide you through more fascinating journeys into the past. Each story unfolds with wisdom and history, helping you find peace and reflection as you drift into restful sleep. Ancient Greece. Women. The role of women in ancient Greece was primarily domestic and centered around managing the household, raising children. This does not mean women were entirely without influence or importance. In the higher echelons of Greek society, there were some notable exceptions. Spartan women, for example, were given a degree of freedom and responsibility not seen in other Greek cities. They were allowed to own property, were expected to maintain physical strength, and were highly respected as the mothers of warriors. The Spartan society, built around military strength, required the women to maintain the strength of the next generation, and supporting their husbands. Women, especially in the classical period, were expected to be modest, virtuous, and primarily focused on the home. They were largely excluded from the public life, including political and intellectual matters, and their primary role was to maintain the family line. However, in Athens, women in ancient Greece could engage in religious practices. Slavery in ancient Greece. Slavery was a cornerstone of ancient Greek society, essential to the functioning of its economy and society. The Greeks enslaved people from a variety of sources: war captives, pirates, foreign traders, and even citizens in debt, and the vast number of slaves who worked in the background, ensuring the city's wealth and success, while free citizens debated in the agora and participated in democratic processes. Slaves worked the land, crafted goods, and supported the economy in ways that were often invisible to the political elite. Slaves were used in a range of occupations, from household servants to laborers in the fields, and even skilled craftsmen. The most famous Greek slave was probably Aesop, the fabulist who, despite his enslavement, went on to write the famous Aesop's Fables. In Athens, where democracy was at its peak, there was a sharp contrast between the free citizens who participated in political life despite their significant roles in society. Slaves had few legal rights, and their lives were harsh and dictated by their masters. However, some slaves could buy their freedom or be freed by their owners. The idea of freedom and justice for all, which was central to Athenian democracy, was at odds with the widespread practice of slavery. Philosophers like Plato and Aristotle did comment on slavery, but their views were complex. Aristotle, for example, justified slavery in some cases, arguing that some people were natural slaves by nature, a view that has, of course, been heavily criticized in modern times. The Greek philosophical schools in ancient Greece. Philosophy was not just an academic pursuit, it was a way of life. Greek philosophers sought answers to life's fundamental questions. Questions about truth, morality, knowledge, and the nature of the universe. The philosophical schools in ancient Greece formed a vibrant and dynamic intellectual landscape, with several key thinkers shaping Western thought. His work, particularly in the Republic, discussed concepts like justice, the nature of the soul, and the ideal state. Plato's theory of forms proposed that the physical world was just a shadow of the true, eternal reality, and that knowledge of this world could only be attained through reason. Socrates was perhaps the most famous of all. He believed that knowledge was achieved through self-examination and questioning. His method of teaching, known as the Socratic method, involved asking questions to provoke critical thinking and draw out underlying assumptions. Their ideas not only influenced their contemporaries, but also resonated through the centuries, shaping the intellectual landscape of Western civilization. Socrates was sentenced to death for corrupting the youth of Athens and questioning the traditional gods. However, his legacy lived on through his student Plato. Plato, who founded the Academy in Athens, advanced Socratic thought and sought to explore deeper questions about the ideal society. Aristotle, Plato's student, took a more empirical approach, emphasizing observation and experience. His works on logic, ethics, and metaphysics laid the foundation for many later scientific studies. Aristotle's Nicomachean Ethics explored the nature of happiness and virtue, arguing that living a virtuous life was the key to achieving eudaimonia or flourishing. The work of these thinkers created the foundation for much of modern philosophy, political theory, and ethics. Greek art and architecture. Greek art and architecture were expressions of both religious devotion and civic pride, and they have left an enduring legacy in the modern world. Greek architecture is perhaps most famous for the Doric, Ionic, and Corinthian columns, each representing different styles of temple design. The most iconic example of Greek architecture is the Parthenon on the Acropolis in Athens, built in honor of the goddess Athena. The Parthenon was a symbol of Athenian wealth, power, and religious devotion, and its architectural design reflected the Greeks' understanding of harmony, proportion, and order. Greek sculpture also achieved remarkable levels of realism and beauty. Early Greek sculptures were often stiff and stylized, but over time, the figures became more naturalistic, capturing the human form with extraordinary detail and grace. Black figure and red figure pottery were used to depict myths, daily life, and religious rituals, and these vases became some of the most valuable artifacts of ancient Greek culture. The intricate scenes on the pottery often told stories of gods, warriors, and mortals, offering glimpses into the beliefs and practices of ancient Greek society. The statues of gods, athletes, and heroes in places like the Temple of Zeus at Olympia and the Acropolis were expressions of the Greek belief in the divine nature of humanity and the ideals of strength, beauty, and wisdom. The Greeks also pioneered the art of the vase. Greek theater, drama, and philosophy on stage. The ancient Greeks also gave birth to drama and theater, which played an integral role in both entertainment and religious practice. The first major playwrights, Aeschylus, wrote tragedies that explored complex themes of fate, divine will, and human suffering. These plays often dealt with the lives of heroes and gods, offering moral lessons and reflections on the nature of humanity. Comedy was another important aspect of Greek theatre, with Aristophanes being one of the most famous comic playwrights. His works often used satire to criticize political figures, societal norms, and even the gods. Theatre was not only a form of entertainment, but a way to engage with the pressing issues of the day, making it a vital part of public life in ancient Greece. Athletes competed in running, wrestling, boxing, and chariot racing, among other events. Victory in the games brought immense fame and rewards, and the winners were treated like heroes. Olympic champions were immortalized in statues and often received lifelong pensions. The games were held in honor of Zeus, and victory in the Olympics was one of the highest honors a Greek man could achieve. The games also served as a unifying event for the Greek city-states, offering a rare opportunity for unity and celebration. Despite the frequent conflicts between them, the Olympics and athletic competitions, the Olympic Games, which began in 776 BCE in Olympia, were a celebration of physical prowess and the gods. The athletes who competed in the Olympics trained rigorously, often starting at a young age.
Subscribe.
Reflecting on ancient Greek society, ancient Greece was a civilization deeply concerned with the nature of humanity, the role of the gods, and the balance between reason and passion. The Greeks laid the foundation for much of Western philosophy, political thought, and art, creating a legacy that continues to shape modern societies today. Their commitment to intellectual inquiry, whether through philosophy, theatre, or the arts, helped to push the boundaries of human thought and creativity. At the same time, their mythology, with its rich stories of gods and heroes, reminded them that the divine was ever present, guiding and influencing their lives. Their commitment to excellence in all things, from philosophy to athletics to art, reminds us of the power of the human spirit and its enduring quest to understand, improve, and immortalize itself. As we reflect on the grandeur of ancient Greek culture, we see a civilization that celebrated the divine in both human potential and the natural world. If this journey through ancient Greece has intrigued you, consider subscribing, and let the wizard guide you to more stories that bring history to life. Greek views on death and the afterlife. In ancient Greek culture, death was a significant part of their philosophical and religious thought. Unlike the Egyptians, whose concept of the afterlife was deeply tied to mummification and a carefully preserved body, the Greeks held a more varied and sometimes skeptical view of what happened after death. Central to their ideas was the realm of the underworld, ruled by the god Hades and his wife Persephone. The Greeks believed that when someone died, their soul journeyed to the underworld, where they would be judged by the gods. The most famous myth related to the afterlife is the tale of Orpheus, whose music was so beautiful it could charm anyone, even the gods. Orpheus' descent to the underworld in search of his wife Eurydice symbolizes both the hope and hopelessness of the afterlife journey. The shades of the dead, the spirits of the departed, were believed to reside in the fields of Asphodela, grey and gloomy realm where most souls drifted, neither punished nor rewarded. However, for the few heroic souls who earned it through exceptional deeds, there was the possibility of entering the Elysian fields, a paradise of eternal peace. Greeks were also concerned with proper burial practices. The funeral rites were vital to ensuring that the soul could safely journey to the afterlife. A common practice was the placement of coins on the mouth of the deceased. These coins were intended to pay the ferryman Charon, who would transport the soul across the river Styx into the underworld. Education in ancient Greece varied widely, but it played a crucial role in shaping Greek society, particularly in city-states like Athens, where intellectual pursuits were deeply valued. Education was typically divided into two parts: physical training and intellectual instruction. Physical education. The Greeks highly valued physical fitness, particularly in the form of athletics. Young boys were trained in gymnastics, wrestling, and running, as these activities were seen as central to Greek ideals of beauty, strength, and virtue. This focus on fitness was tied to the belief that the mind and body should be in harmony, a theme that later philosophers like Plato would emphasize, but also a center of learning, where philosophers, poets, and citizens alike gathered to discuss the important issues of the day. Young boys often studied under tutors and were taught to read and write in the same vein as the great Greek poets and philosophers, including Homer and Socrates. Intellectual education. For those wealthy enough to afford it, education in ancient Greece was primarily focused on the study of literature, music, and philosophy. Rhetoric was taught to help students participate in the political life of the city. Education was not only about preparing for political participation, but also about cultivating a well-rounded and reflective individual. In Athens, the agora was not just a place for commerce. The concept of citizenship and democracy in Athens, one of the most significant contributions of ancient Greece, especially Athens, was the concept of democracy. The Athenian democracy is often seen as the precursor to modern democratic systems. Though it was limited in scope compared to today's standards, this included the right to vote on important matters, speak in the assembly, and serve on various governmental bodies. The government was not run by a single ruler, but by a council of citizens who represented the collective voice of the people. Here, the Greeks pioneered the idea of public debate and reasoned argument as ways to solve problems and govern a society. Socrates, for example, spent much of his life in the questioning assumptions and encouraging others to seek wisdom through dialogue. Citizens were expected to take part in the political process, including military service and holding public office. However, women, slaves, and foreigners were excluded from the political process. This narrow definition of citizenship did not extend to the broader population, and it was considered a privilege to be a citizen of Athens. Women, for example, had few rights and were expected to stay in the domestic sphere, and slavery played a crucial role in the functioning of the economy. Despite these flaws, Athenian democracy laid the groundwork for the political systems that would develop in the West. In Athens, only free male citizens over the age of 18 could participate in the democratic process. Athenian democracy, particularly during the time of Pericles, emphasized public participation and civic responsibility. At the heart of this democracy was the agora, where people would gather to discuss and debate. While Athenian democracy was groundbreaking, it was not perfect. Symposia, the Greek social ritual of drinking and conversation. The symposium was an important social institution in ancient Greece, a ritualized gathering of men to discuss philosophy, politics, and life, all while drinking wine. The word symposium itself means drinking together, and these events were central to Greek social life, especially among the aristocracy. Wine was diluted with water, as the Greeks believed that undiluted wine led to excessive drunkenness and an inability to engage in intellectual pursuits. The symposium, which centers on a conversation about the nature of love between several prominent figures. It is through this dialogue that we learn about Plato's ideas of ideal love, a relationship that transcends physical attraction and becomes a philosophical pursuit of beauty and wisdom. After the meal, the host would invite the guests to engage in discussions, often touched on topics ranging from ethics and virtue to art and love. The symposium typically began with a meal, followed by drinking and conversation. The famous philosopher Plato wrote one of his most well-known dialogues. At the symposium, one would often hear lyrical poetry, and musicians and dancers would entertain the guests. These gatherings also provided a space for the Greeks to engage in philosophical debates and explore their moral and intellectual values, and women were generally excluded from these events. This exclusion reflects the gender norms of Greek society, where women were largely confined to the domestic realm. The symposium had an element of exclusivity, however, as it was often reserved for male citizens. Greek art and architecture. Expression of ideals. Greek art and architecture were expressions of the ideals of the Greek polis. Greek artists and architects were inspired by their gods, nature, and their belief in the ideal form, such as Phidias, created lifelike statues of gods and heroes. It was a reflection of their philosophical ideals, the belief in the beauty of the human form, and the desire to depict perfect balance between the divine and the mortal. The contrapposto pose, where a figure stands with one leg forward, was developed in the classical period to create more naturalistic and dynamic figures. The Parthenon statues, which depict various gods and goddesses, were not just representations of divine beings, but idealized human forms that embodied both beauty and balance. This pursuit of perfection is seen in both their sculpture and architecture. Sculpture, Greek sculptors. Architecture, the Doric, Ionic, and Corinthian orders of columns became iconic features of Greek temples and buildings. The Parthenon is perhaps the greatest example of Greek temple architecture, combining symmetry and precision to achieve beauty and harmony. Its construction symbolized the strength of Athens, both as a city-state and as a civilization dedicated to the ideals of reason, order, and perfection. Greek art was not simply decorative. Reflections on we see a society that was deeply engaged with understanding both the world around them and the cosmos beyond. They questioned human existence, sought divine guidance through their gods, and elevated intellectual inquiry to new heights. They celebrated the human body as a reflection of divine perfection and pursued beauty, truth, and justice in their art, philosophy, and daily lives. Greek culture. As we look back on the rich culture of ancient Greece, the Greek idea of the ideal weather through the physical perfection of sculpture, the intellectual idealism of philosophers, consider subscribing, and the wizard will continue to share these timeless stories, helping you drift into peaceful slumber while learning about the past. Or the civic ideal of democracy continues to influence the Western world today. Their culture was not just about achievements in art or politics, but about a deep and enduring connection to the divine and human potential. If you've enjoyed exploring even more facets of ancient Greek culture, the role of theatre in Greek life, art, entertainment, and philosophy, one of the most enduring legacies of ancient Greece is its theatre, a fundamental part of their cultural life. The Greeks were pioneers in the development of drama, which evolved into both tragedy and comedy, genres that would shape Western literature and theatre for centuries to come. Theatre was not just entertainment for the Greeks. It was a way to explore the human condition, social issues, and the relationship between mortals and the divine. The origins of Greek theatre can be traced back to the Dionysian festivals, religious festivals dedicated to Dionysus, the god of wine, fertility, and revelry. The most famous tragic playwrights, Aeschylus and Euripides, examined the tension between human agency and divine will, often forcing audiences to consider ethical dilemmas and the consequences of human actions. These festivals featured dramatic performances as part of the worship rituals, where choruses would sing and dance to honor the god. Theatre became a medium for questioning the very fabric of society, and it was interwoven with philosophy, especially in the works of Plato, who often used dramatic scenarios to illustrate his philosophical points. Aristophanes was the master of Greek comedy, using sharp wit and humor to criticize political figures, social norms, and the gods themselves. In plays like Lysistrata, Aristophanes used comedy to question the nature of war, gender roles, and power, using humor as a tool for both social criticism and reflection. Over time, these rituals evolved into full-fledged performances, with actors playing out the lives and stories of gods and heroes. The playwrights of ancient Greece, such as Aeschylus, are still studied today for their exploration of morality, fate, and the human experience. Tragedy. Greek tragedies often revolved around heroic characters who faced a downfall due to fate, flawed decisions, or divine punishment. The actors were all male, and they wore elaborate masks to portray different characters and emotions. The chorus, a group of performers who would sing and narrate portions of the play, played an important role in the development of Greek theatre, helping to reflect on the themes of the performance and guiding the audience's emotions. Comedy. Greek comedy, on the other hand, was characterized by satirical humor and political commentary. Greek theatre was typically performed in open-air amphitheaters, with large crowds attending the play. For the Greeks, theatre wasn't just about watching a play for enjoyment, it was about reflection on moral values, fate, and the interaction between gods and men.
Subscribe.
Slavery in ancient Greece. The backbone of the economy, slavery was a fundamental aspect of ancient Greek society, particularly in cities like Athens, where it played an integral role in the economy and the daily life of its citizens. Slaves were used in a variety of roles, from household servants to skilled laborers, and even state-run workshops. The source of slaves in ancient Greece was varied. Some slaves were captives from war, others were born into slavery, and some were even enslaved because of debt. The life of a slave depended greatly on their owner's position in society. In wealthier households, slaves often performed domestic tasks like cooking, cleaning, and caring for children. Aristotle's views on slavery would deeply influence later historical periods. Others, like Plato, though not outright abolitionists, explored the ethical implications of a society that thrived on enslaved labor. These slaves might have more favorable conditions, but they were still considered property. In contrast, those slaves who worked in the mines or on large estates often endured brutal and grueling conditions. The slaves who worked in the mines of Laurion, an important silver mining region in Athens, faced extremely harsh conditions and a high mortality rate. These laborers were crucial to the economic wealth of Athens, as the silver mine here funded much of the military and public projects, including the construction of the Parthenon. The relationship between slaves and free citizens was complex. While free citizens enjoyed political participation in the Athenian democracy, slaves had no rights and were completely dependent on their masters. However, despite their lack of rights, some slaves could eventually buy their freedom, or be freed through a will by a benevolent master. Interestingly, despite the central role of slavery in Greek society, some philosophers like Aristotle justified slavery, arguing that some individuals were naturally suited to serve others. Democracy in Athens. The birth of civic engagement. Ancient Greece, particularly the city-state of Athens, is often credited as the birthplace of democracy. The Athenian model, however, was quite different from modern democracy, especially in terms of who could participate and vote on decisions regarding war, public policy, and foreign relations. The concept of citizenship was thus narrowly defined. While Athens prided itself on its democratic ideals, its democracy was limited to a small segment of its population. Citizens would gather in the agora, where they would debate, discuss, and vote on key issues. The idea that citizenship carried responsibilities, and that public discourse was necessary for a functioning society, laid the groundwork for democratic principles that would be revisited by philosophers and political leaders centuries later. Socrates, in particular, used dialogue as a way to question the very foundations of democracy, morality, and knowledge. Plato, his student, famously criticized Athenian democracy in his work, The Republic, arguing that it was a system where the unwise masses could make decisions that harmed the state. This tension between participation and wisdom would continue to influence political thought throughout history. Public speaking was a highly valued skill, and orators who could sway the crowd were seen as powerful figures in Athenian society. Athenian democracy was a direct form of democracy, meaning that citizens themselves participated in decisions rather than electing representatives to do so. The Athenian assembly was the central political institution. Every male citizen over the age of 18 could attend the assembly, propose laws. However, this democracy was not universal. Women, slaves, and metics were excluded from participation in the political process. Athenian democracy was also heavily influenced by public debate and philosophy. Despite its limitations, Athenian democracy had a lasting impact on the development of political systems. Greek symposiums, the social heart of Greek life. One of the most fascinating aspects of ancient Greek society was the symposium, a social gathering that revolved around drinking, conversation, and intellectual exchange. The symposium was a social event where men from the elite classes came together to drink wine, engage in philosophical discussions, listen to music, and entertain each other. These gatherings were important, not just for socializing but also for discussing matters of public interest, philosophy, and politics. At a typical symposium, the participants would recline on couches, and the host would provide them with wine mixed with water. The wine was diluted to ensure the guests did not get overly drunk, which would undermine the intellectual nature of the gathering. After the meal, the symposium often featured discussions about important philosophical, political, and ethical questions. Philosophers like Plato and Socrates would engage in lively debates about the nature of love, justice. The hetairai were sometimes invited. These women were often highly skilled in conversation, music, and the art, and they participated in the intellectual and social life of the symposium and morality. The symposium had several key elements. The drinking. Participants drank wine, which was diluted with water, reflecting the balance Greeks sought between excess and moderation. The conversation. Intellectual discourse was encouraged. Entertainment. The symposium also featured entertainment, including music, poetry, and dancing, ensuring that the gathering was both intellectually stimulating and socially enjoyable. While women were largely excluded from these reflections on Greek life, ancient Greece was a society that balanced intellectual pursuit, religious devotion, and civic responsibility. It was a culture that prized the human potential to reason, debate, and improve society, whether through the pursuit of philosophy, the theatre, the development of democracy, or the rituals of daily life. The Greeks sought to understand the world and to create a more just, beautiful, and harmonious society. Yet, Greek life was also full of contradictions. The pursuit of freedom and reason for some was built on the backs of slaves, and democracy was limited to a select few. These tensions, which played out in the agora, in the symposiums, and in the stories of their gods and heroes, are part of what makes ancient Greece so fascinating. The ideas they explored continue to resonate with us today. If you've enjoyed this deeper dive into ancient Greek life, consider subscribing, and the wizard will continue to guide you through more layers of history, unraveling the richness of the past while you relax into peaceful slumber. Greek religion and rituals. A world of gods, and sacred spaces. Greek religion was deeply interwoven with daily life, offering answers to life's most profound questions, providing structure, and offering a sense of divine protection or retribution. The Greeks didn't practice religion in the same way we might think of today, with a single book of faith or central religious leader. Instead, their worship was centered around the gods and goddesses, each of whom governed specific aspects of the universe, from the sky to the seas, from agriculture to wisdom. These gods, such as Zeus, Hera, Poseidon, and Athena, had distinct personalities, roles, and domains. The famous Parthenon temple in Athens was dedicated to her. Each city-state often worshipped a particular god or goddess, and the relationship between humans and these deities was crucial. As a protector of women and children, she held great significance in daily Greek life. Polytheism and the gods of Mount Olympus. They were jealous, vengeful, playful, loving, and impulsive, and this made their interactions with humans far more relatable and complex. For instance, Hera, the goddess of marriage, often punished women who had relationships with Zeus, while Athena was known to help heroes on their quests, but always through strategy and reason rather than brute force. At the center of Greek religion were the 12 Olympian gods, who resided on Mount Olympus. Zeus, as the god of the sky and thunder, was the protector of law and order. He was considered the ruler of all gods and men, and his will was believed to be decisive in matters of fate and justice. Athena, the goddess of wisdom, courage, and war, was particularly revered by Athens, where her patronage was central to the city's identity and culture. Apollo, god of music, poetry, prophecy, and healing, was associated with the sun, and his oracle at Delphi became one of the most revered sites in Greece, where people sought advice from the gods through prophetic messages. Artemis, his twin sister, was the goddess of the moon, hunting, and childbirth. The gods were not distant, all-powerful beings in the Greek worldview. Instead, they were anthropomorphic. They had human characteristics, emotions, and flaws, rituals and sacrifices, ensuring favor from the gods. Greek religious Delphi, dedicated to Apollo, and the Parthenon in Athens, dedicated to Athena, were some of the most famous temples, and they served as focal points for religious life. Practice, they still reflected the Greeks' deep connection between competition. Many Greeks would pray privately to the gods for guidance, protection, or to fulfill personal desires. Public festivals often included dramatic performances, plays, performed in honor of gods like Dionysus, the god of wine and revelry. Theater festivals became central in Athenian life, blending both entertainment and religious devotion. Physical prowess and divine favor was marked by rituals and sacrifices to gain favor from the gods and to ensure harmony in the universe. The most common rituals included offerings of food, wine, and incense. Animal sacrifices were also central to religious practice, where animals like oxen, sheep, and goats were ritually slaughtered and offered to the gods. After the sacrifice, the meat would often be cooked and shared among the worshippers, and the gods were symbolically honored through the burning of the animal's fat on altars. Temples were the physical manifestations of the gods' presence, and many city-states had their own temples to honor their specific patron gods. The Olympic Games were originally part of the religious festivals to honor Zeus, though they became more secular over time. Rituals were not just public, but also personal. The concept of heroism. From mortals to legends, the Greek idea of heroism was another key component of their worldview. Heroes in Greek mythology were often mortals who achieved great feats, and were celebrated for their bravery, strength, wisdom, or cunning. Unlike the gods, heroes were not immortal, but they were often honored and worshipped after death. They were seen as exceptional human beings who had risen above the ordinary and attained divine favor. Famous heroes: Achilles, Heracles, and Odysseus. Achilles, the central figure in Homer's Iliad, is one of the most famous Greek heroes, known for his strength, valor, and near invincibility in battle. Achilles embodies the Greek concept of heroism. However, his tale also highlights the tragic flaw inherent in Greek heroism, the pursuit of glory and immortality, even at the cost of one's own life. Unlike Achilles or Heracles, Odysseus' heroism lies in his wisdom, cleverness and ability to outsmart opponents, rather than his sheer physical prowess. Many Greek cities, especially Athens, saw themselves as the heirs to these heroic ideals, emulating them in their own culture and military exploits. Odysseus' long journey home after the Trojan War reflects the Greek admiration for intellect and Achilles' wrath, which leads to his downfall, underscores the complexities of Greek heroism. It's not just about strength, but the character flaws and choices that define a hero's legacy. Heracles, perhaps the most famous of all Greek heroes, is celebrated for completing the 12 labors, which were deemed impossible tasks given to him by King Eurypylus. Heracles' strength and perseverance made him a symbol of human endurance and heroic virtue. Yet, like many heroes, his life was also full of suffering, illustrating the Greeks' view that true heroism came with personal sacrifice and often tragic consequences. Odysseus, the hero of Homer's Odyssey, represents another type of heroism. Heroic qualities, bravery, strength, honor, and even flaws are central to Greek identity. Greek warfare. The warrior spirit of the city-state's warfare was a crucial aspect of Greek life, particularly because of the constant rivalry between the city-states, like Athens, Sparta, Corinth, and Thebes. These city-states often engaged in conflict, but at the same time, they shared common cultural and religious values. The hoplite and the phalanx. Formation of Greek armies. Hoplites fought in a formation known as the phalanx, a tightly packed formation of soldiers, each holding a spear and shield. The phalanx was highly effective, allowing the Greeks to maintain defensive strength while advancing together as a unit. The success of the phalanx was a direct reflection of Greek values: unity, cooperation, and strength in numbers. The most famous military unit in ancient Greece was the hoplite, a heavily armed foot soldier who was the backbone of Greek armies, and Spartans were trained to fight for their city-state, to never retreat, and to uphold the honor of the group over the individual. This system produced some of the most renowned warriors in Greek history, particularly during the Peloponnesian War against Athens. The Battle of Marathon, in which the Athenians defeated the much larger Persian force, is one of the most famous examples of Greek military prowess. The Greco-Persian Wars, particularly the Battle of Thermopylae, also showcased the Greek heroism in warfare, with Spartan warriors demonstrating their legendary discipline and bravery, unlike Athens, which was focused on art, culture, and intellectual pursuits. Sparta's primary concern was military readiness. Spartan boys began their agoge training at the age of 7, learning discipline, combat skills, and survival techniques. Sparta's soldiers, called hoplites, were some of the most feared warriors in Greece, and their emphasis on loyalty, obedience, and strength made them exceptional in battle. The Spartans. Masters of war, the Spartans, from the city-state of Sparta, were known for their militaristic society. Spartan society was built around the idea of perfecting military prowess. Reflections on Greek culture. A world of heroism, beliefs, and war. Ancient Greek life was defined by a balance between reason and passion, peace and war, and individual achievement and collective responsibility. The Greeks revered the gods and believed their actions shaped not only their fates, but also the fate of their cities. At the same time, their commitment to reason, particularly in philosophy and politics, fostered a culture of intellectual and civic engagement that changed the world. The heroes they celebrated, whether in myth or in real life, embodied the virtues and flaws that the Greeks valued most: strength, intellect, sacrifice, and honor. And while their city-states were often divided by conflict, their shared culture of war, athleticism, and devotion to the gods united them in ways that transcended individual rivalries. If you've found this exploration of Greek culture engaging, consider subscribing, and the wizard will continue guiding you through more ancient tales, ensuring peaceful nights and restful sleep as we explore these timeless societies. Greek concept of beauty and aesthetics, pursuit of the ideal form in ancient Greece. Beauty wasn't just a matter of appearance. It was a reflection of the divine and the ideal. The Greeks believed in the concept of symmetry, proportion, and balance in all things. This belief manifested in their art, architecture, and even their understanding of human bodies. Beauty in art and sculpture. Greek sculpture is one of the most celebrated forms of art in human history. The Greeks sought to capture perfection through realistic, yet idealized representations of the human body. The transition from the archaic period, where figures were rigid and stylized, to the classical period, where figures became more relaxed and natural, marked the Greeks' desire to capture the ideal human form. The Kouros statues of the archaic period depicted young men in a stiff, formal pose, representing the youthful ideal by the time of the classical period. However, artists like Phidias and Polykleitos perfected the art of depicting the human figure in perfect proportion. The Discobolus by the sculptor Myron is an example of this approach, where the figure is in a dynamic, natural pose, showcasing the balance of strength and beauty. Greek artists also applied this idea of symmetry and balance to their architecture, seeking harmony between form and function. The most famous example is the Parthenon in Athens, which is not only a temple dedicated to Athena, but also a physical representation of the Greek ideal. Its proportions are meticulously calculated to create the perfect balance between beauty and engineering. Beauty and philosophy. The ideal of beauty was also tied to philosophy. Philosophers such as Plato explored the connection between beauty and the higher truths. In his theory of forms, Plato argued that true beauty was not found in physical appearance, but in the ideal forms of things, the perfect, unchanging concepts that existed in the realm of ideas. For Plato, physical beauty was merely a reflection of a higher, perfect beauty that could only be appreciated through reason and intellect. In his Dialogue Symposium, Plato also examines the nature of love and beauty, famously depicting the philosopher Socrates, discussing how love begins with the admiration of a beautiful body, but should ultimately lead one to the love of the form of beauty itself, a concept beyond the physical realm. Family structure and gender roles in Greek society. The Greek family was the cornerstone of social life, and the roles within the family were clearly defined. In general, patriarchy defined Greek society, and the responsibilities of men and women were divided based on gender. The role of men and women. The ideal of Greek manhood was tied to being a citizen who could participate in the assembly and speak in public debate. Women were not allowed to vote, participate in public debates, or hold official positions. However, Spartan women were more liberated compared to women in Athens. In Sparta, women were encouraged to be physically fit, as they were seen as critical in producing strong warriors for the cities. They could own land and manage property in their husband's absence, offering a more egalitarian role compared to the rest of Greece. Men were responsible for the defense of the city and the maintenance of its culture and economy. Their role in public life was seen as essential to the functioning of the polis. Men. Greek men, particularly those in the city-state of Athens, had the privilege of participating in politics, military service, and public life. Women. Women's roles in ancient Greek society were mostly confined to the home and the raising of children. While marriage was an essential aspect of their lives, it was often an arrangement made by their fathers. Women's role was tied to maintaining the oikos, which was considered the foundation of Greek society. In contrast, Athenian women were expected to focus on managing the household, weaving, cooking, and taking care of children. Marriage and Greek view of marriage was very practical and aimed at ensuring the continuity of the family and the city. A dowry was typically provided by the bride's family, and marriage was considered a partnership for both practical and social reasons. In Plato's Republic, the idea of community marriage was even discussed, where traditional family structures were set aside to ensure equality and cohesion within the community. And it was the role of women to ensure the continuity of religious rituals in the home. This role of women as keepers of tradition and the gods was symbolized in the Hestia, the goddess of the hearth, who was worshipped at every home. Greek ideal. Marriage was also seen as an institution through which the gods would be honored.
Like and subscribe. The wizard will bless you.
Economic life in ancient Greece. Trade, agriculture, and wealth. The ancient Greek economy was a combination of agriculture, trade, and craftsmanship. Greece's rugged terrain meant that large-scale farming was difficult. So many Greeks engaged in trade with other Mediterranean civilizations, including Egypt, Persia, and later Rome. Agriculture and the land, olive oil and wine were critical products for trade. The Greeks also raised sheep and goats for wool and meat. Large estates were worked by slaves, and the wealth of the aristocracy was built on land ownership. Agriculture formed the basis of the Greek economy, and wheat, olives, and grapes were the primary crops grown. Trade and commerce. Athens, in particular, had a bustling port at Piraeus, which allowed them to establish strong commercial ties with other regions. Greek pottery and crafts were traded widely throughout the Mediterranean. The Greeks were also skilled shipbuilders and had a strong navy, which facilitated their trade routes. As Greek city-states became more established, they became centers of trade, wealth, and luxury. Wealthy men in Athens could afford to host grand symposia and sponsor public works, such as theatre productions and temples. These elites were often involved in civic and religious life, playing a major role in the cultural output of the cities. While the majority of Greeks lived modestly, there was also a growing class of wealthy elites who enjoyed luxuries such as fine pottery, jewelry, and fabrics. Greek philosophy and education, a legacy of intellectual pursuits. Greek education, centered around the development of virtue, rhetoric, philosophy, and logic. From the Socratic method to Platonic ideals, education was seen as the key to becoming an informed and virtuous citizen. Socrates, Plato, and Aristotle. Socrates, who focused on questioning and dialogue, believed that knowledge could only be attained through self-examination and critical thinking. His philosophy challenged the young men of Athens to question everything from ethics to politics. His works laid the foundation for natural sciences, ethics, and logic, influencing many fields of study for centuries. Plato's dialogues laid the groundwork for Western philosophy, and his ideas on forms and justice continue to influence political thought today. Plato, his student, wrote extensively on the nature of justice and the ideal society. Found in the Academy, where he taught for over 20 years, Aristotle, Plato's student, emphasized empirical observation and believed that knowledge should come from understanding the physical world. The emphasis on reason, logic, and ethics in Greek education was vital to the functioning of their democracy, as it allowed citizens to participate in debate and discussion with a grounded understanding of justice, ethics, and society. Reflections on Greek culture. The ancient Greeks were a people of contrasts between reason and passion, public life and private duty, freedom and restriction. They gave us the ideal of beauty. explored the depths of philosophy, and developed a sense of democracy that was both revolutionary and limited. Their belief in balance, whether through the symmetry of their architecture or the philosophical balance of their thinking, has influenced not only Western thought but the entire modern world. And the wizard will continue to share more stories, guiding you through the rich past while ensuring a peaceful slumber. Greek society was deeply connected to the divine, whether through their gods and goddesses or through the heroic ideals they celebrated. At the same time, their intellectual contributions and cultural legacies remind us of their enduring commitment to understanding the world, pursuing knowledge, and striving for excellence. If you've enjoyed exploring these deeper aspects of Greek life, consider subscribing. Greek religious practices, polytheism, rituals, and oracles. Religion was central to every aspect of Greek life. The Greeks believed in a pantheon of gods and goddesses who were involved in every aspect of the natural world and human affairs. These gods were not just subjects of mythology, they were actively worshipped, and rituals were performed regularly to ensure the favor of the divine. Polytheism and the gods. The Olympian gods were believed to be living, breathing beings who interacted with humans and could be appeased or angered through ritual actions. Each city-state had its own patron god or goddess, and religious festivals dedicated to these deities were important events in Greek life. The temples built to honor these gods were not only places of worship, but also cultural and political centers. Zeus was worshipped as the king of the gods, often depicted with a thunderbolt in hand. He was the god of the sky, weather, and justice. Athena, the goddess of wisdom, warfare, and craft, was especially revered by Athens, and her temple, the Parthenon, remains a symbol of Athenian identity. Apollo, god of the sun, music, and prophecy, had a major influence, especially in places like Delphi, where his oracle was sought by city-states and individuals alike for guidance. Hera, the goddess of marriage, was revered in many places, but especially important in Argos. She was often invoked for marital prosperity and protection. People prayed to the gods for protection, guidance, and favor in all things, from personal matters like love and family to warfare and commerce. The gods' personalities were often full of human qualities, such as jealousy, vengeance, and love, which made them highly relatable to the people. The Greek gods were part of the daily life of their worshippers. Rituals, sacrifices, and festivals. The Greeks performed regular rituals to honor the gods. These included sacrifices of animals, which were presented on altars to gain favor from the gods. The Olympic Games were not just athletic competitions. They were religious rituals meant to honor the gods, with winners being crowned with a wreath of olive branches, a symbol of divine favor. These games became a tradition, with cities sending their best athletes to compete, demonstrating the Greeks' integration of religion and physical prowess. The process often involved not only the sacrifice itself, but also the sharing of the meat among the people as a form of communal bond and divine communion. The most famous oracle was located at Delphi, where the Pythia, the high priestess of Apollo, would enter a trance and offer cryptic messages to those who sought guidance. These practices were believed to give individuals and city-states a glimpse into the gods' intentions. The oracle at Delphi was highly regarded, and many city-states consulted it before making major decisions, such as going to war or founding new colonies. There were also the Dionysian festivals, dedicated to Dionysus, the god of wine and revelry, which featured dramatic performances of tragedies and comedies. Public religious festivals were significant moments in Greek society. The most famous of these festivals was the Olympic Games, which began in 776 BCE in Olympia, dedicated to Zeus. Other notable festivals include the Panathenaic Games in Athens, dedicated to Athena, which involved athletic events, music and poetry competitions, oracles and divination. The Greeks had a deep belief in oracles, individuals or locations believed to communicate the will of the gods. The Greeks practiced various forms of divination, including reading, examining the flight patterns of birds, and casting lots. Festivals and public life, a celebration of gods and civic identity. Greek festivals were a central feature of public life. These events were not just celebrations of the gods, but also occasions for civic pride, social cohesion, and cultural expression. The Panathenaic Festival, one of the most important festivals in Athens, was the Panathenaic Festival, which honored Athena, the city's patron goddess. This festival was held every 4 years, and was a time for the people of Athens to showcase their devotion to Athena through offerings, sacrifices, athletic competitions, and cultural performances. This procession, along with athletic contests and artistic exhibitions, underscored the importance of the gods in daily life and the connection between civic pride and religious devotion. The festival culminated in a grand procession to the Parthenon, where sacred robes were presented to the goddess. The Dionysian festivals. The Dionysian festivals celebrated Dionysus, the god of wine, fertility, and theatre. These festivals were among the most famous in Athens, where playwrights like Aeschylus, Sophocles, and Euripides premiered their dramatic works. The festivals included tragic and comic performances that were performed in large theatres, such as the Theatre of Dionysus in Athens. These festivals were integral to the growth of Greek drama as a medium for exploring morality, fate, and society. Plays like Sophocles, Oedipus Rex were more than just entertainment. They were reflections on the human condition, testing the relationships between gods, men, and destiny. Greek military system. The warrior's code war was a constant in the ancient Greek world, and military prowess was not only seen as a necessity, but also a point of honor. Warfare in Greece was largely conducted by citizen soldiers who fought in the ranks of the hoplite army, hoplite soldiers, and the phalanx. The hoplite was a heavily armed foot soldier who fought as part of a dense, shielded formation known as the phalanx. This military formation was highly effective, as it allowed the hoplites to fight as a unified unit rather than individuals. The military codes in Sparta were particularly strict, and their soldiers, known as Spartans, were trained from childhood in the agog system, a brutal regimen of physical and military training that prepared them for a lifetime of service to their city-state. Athens, with its powerful navy, relied on its ability to project power across the seas, while Sparta, with its powerful army, relied on its land-based superiority. The war eventually led to the downfall of Athens and a temporary decline in its democratic ideals. Each soldier carried a round shield, a sword, and a spear, and their strength was in their ability to work together. Greek soldiers valued discipline, unity, and honor. The Peloponnesian War and Athenian naval power. The Peloponnesian War between Athens and Sparta showcased the tensions between the two rival cities. However, Athens' naval power was a significant part of its military legacy. The Athenian navy was central to the city's defense and expansion, and its triremes played a crucial role in both the Persian Wars and the Peloponnesian War.
Subscribe.
Greek art and literature, a celebration of form and thought. Greek art, sculpture and architecture. The Greek approach to art was rooted in the idea of beauty, proportion, and the ideal form. Greek sculptures, especially in the classical period, sought to portray the human body in its most perfect and natural form. The Parthenon, dedicated to Athena, is perhaps the most famous example of Greek architecture, embodying the Greek ideals of harmony and balance in its design. The sculptures of Phidias, including his depiction of Athena inside the Parthenon, are examples of this drive toward the dialyzed form. Greek sculpture was used not only for decorative purposes, but also as a way to express the divinity of human form. Works like Homer's Iliad and Odyssey told tales of gods, heroes, and the human struggle. These stories were more than just adventures. They explored themes of honor, fate, sacrifice, and heroism. Homer's works laid the foundation for much of Western literature, influencing poets, philosophers, and artists for centuries. Greek literature, epic poetry, and philosophy, their writings on ethics, metaphysics, and political theory have shaped the way the Western world thinks about knowledge, virtue, and society. Greek literature, especially epic poetry, became one of the most influential cultural contributions of ancient Greece. The philosophers of ancient Greece, such as Plato and Aristotle, also left a lasting legacy. The decline of Athens. The aftermath of the Peloponnesian War. The Peloponnesian War between Athens and Sparta was a major turning point in Greek history. For nearly 30 years, Athens and Sparta, along with their respective allies, fought for dominance in the Greek world. The war ended in a devastating defeat for Athens, marking the beginning of its decline. The war had severely weakened Athens' economy, and its once powerful navy was decimated. Sparta, having emerged victorious, briefly took control of Athens and imposed an oligarchic government known as the 30 Tyrants. This period of tyranny was marked by political instability, leading to widespread discontent among the Athenian populace. The consequences of defeat. The war had taken its toll, and the Athenian Empire was effectively over. Aristotle's work, particularly in the areas of ethics, logic, and politics, continued to shape Western thought for centuries. Even so, Athens remained an important cultural and intellectual center for many years, attracting thinkers, philosophers, and artists from across the Greek world. Following Athens' defeat in the Peloponnesian War, the city's political, military, and cultural supremacy began to unravel. Plato's work in the Republic explores the idea of the ideal state, the role of the philosopher king, and the moral decay of societies that prioritize power over wisdom. Although democracy was eventually restored in Athens, the city's influence over the Greek world was no longer what it had been. The war's brutality and the collapse of Athens' empire led many philosophers to reconsider the role of the state and the nature of human behavior. Socrates, already critical of the state and its role in individual lives, saw the war as a tragic reminder of the flaws in Athenian democracy. His critiques of the Athenian way of life ultimately led to his trial and execution in 399 BCE. Philosophical reflection. The impact on Greek thought. The aftermath of the war also had profound effects on Greek thought. In his Socratic dialogues, particularly those written by his student Plato, we see a deep concern for the consequences of flawed governance. As Athens began to fade as a military power, the city's intellectual and philosophical contributions, particularly those of Plato and Aristotle, became even more influential. The decline of Athens. The aftermath of the Peloponnesian War. The Peloponnesian War between Athens and Sparta was a major turning point in Greek history. For nearly 30 years, Athens and Sparta, along with their respective allies, fought for dominance in the Greek world. The war ended in a devastating defeat for Athens, marking the beginning of its decline. The consequences of defeat. Following Athens' defeat in the Peloponnesian War, the city's political, military, and cultural supremacy began to unravel. The war had severely weakened Athens' economy, and its once powerful navy was decimated. The war had taken its toll, and the Athenian Empire was effectively over. Even so, Athens remained an important cultural and intellectual center for many years. attracting thinkers, philosophers, and artists from across the Greek world. Aristotle's work, particularly in the areas of ethics, logic, and politics, continued to shape Western thought for centuries. Sparta, having emerged victorious, briefly took control of Athens and imposed an oligarchic government known as the 30 Tyrants. This period of tyranny was marked by political instability, leading to widespread discontent among the Athenian populace. Although democracy was eventually restored in Athens, the city's influence over the Greek world was no longer what it had been. Philosophical reflection. The impact on Greek thought. The aftermath of the war also had profound effects on Greek thought. The war's brutality and the collapse of Athens' empire led many philosophers to reconsider the role of the state and the nature of human behavior. Plato's work in the Republic explores the idea of the ideal state, the role of the philosopher king, and the moral decay of societies that prioritize power over wisdom. Socrates, already critical of the state and its role in individual lives, saw the war as a tragic reminder of the flaws in Athenian democracy. His critiques of the Athenian way of life ultimately led to his trial and execution in 399 BCE. In his Socratic dialogues, particularly those written by his student Plato, we see a deep concern for the consequences of flawed governance. As Athens began to fade as a military power, the city's intellectual and philosophical contributions, particularly those of Plato and Aristotle, became even more influential. The rise of Macedon and the conquest of Greece. Philip II and Alexander the Great, as Athens and other Greek city-states, were weakened by internal strife and external war. A new power began to emerge in the north. The Kingdom of Macedon, led by Philip II, the Macedonian monarchy had been growing in strength for several decades, and Philip II was a brilliant military strategist who would transform Macedon into a dominant force in the Greek world. Philip II, uniting the Greek world after his victory at the Battle of Chaeronea in 338 BC, Philip secured Macedonian dominance over Greece. He did not seek to destroy Greek culture, but instead aimed to preserve and unify it under Macedonian control. Philip II was able to unite the Greek city-states under his rule through a combination of military might, diplomacy, and political marriages. Philip's most important legacy was his creation of a powerful and unified Greek league, known as the Corinthian League, which allowed him to exert influence over the entire Greek world. His plans for a campaign against Persia were cut short, however, when he was assassinated in 336 BCE, Alexander the Great. The legacy of Greek expansion, Hellenization. The process of spreading Greek ideas, language, and culture became a defining characteristic of his empire. Cities like Alexandria in Egypt were founded as cultural and intellectual centers where Greek culture could thrive. Philip II's son, Alexander the Great, would continue his father's mission, taking it to unprecedented heights. In 334 BCE, at the age of 20, Alexander set out on his legendary campaign to conquer the Persian Empire. His military genius, combined with the training he received from Aristotle, enabled him to build one of the largest empires in history, stretching from Greece to Egypt and into India. Alexander's conquests were not just military in nature. He sought to spread Greek culture throughout his empire. Even though Alexander's empire did not survive long after his death, in 323 BCE, his legacy remained in the Hellenistic period, a time when Greek culture, language, and influence spread across vast parts of the known world. The Hellenistic period. The spread of Greek culture after Alexander's death. The Greek world entered the Hellenistic period, marked by the spread of Greek culture and influence across the Mediterranean and Near East. The successor kingdoms that emerged from Alexander's empire, including the Ptolemaic and Antigonid dynasties, were all profoundly influenced by Greek art, literature, and thought. Cultural exchange and intellectual flourishing. Greek became the lingua franca of the Eastern Mediterranean and much of the Middle East. Intellectual centers, like Alexandria in Egypt, became hubs for learning, with the Library of Alexandria becoming the greatest repository of knowledge in the ancient world. The Hellenistic period was a time of cultural fusion, where Greek ideals were blended with those of the Egyptians, Persians, and Indians, and self-control and Epicureanism, which taught that pleasure was the highest good. These schools of thought continued the Greek tradition of examining human nature and the pursuit of happiness, albeit in new and different ways. In philosophy, new schools of thought emerged, including Stoicism, which focused on virtue.
Like and subscribe. The wizard will bless you.
The legacy of ancient Greece. Foundations of Western civilization as the Hellenistic period gave way to the rise of Rome. The legacy of Greek culture continued to shape the Western world. Greek philosophy, particularly the works of Plato and Aristotle, would become foundational to Roman thought, influencing the rise of Roman law and politics. The Greek emphasis on democracy, individualism, and reasoning has had a lasting impact on modern thought. The legacy of Greek drama, literature, and art also endures, continuing to shape how we engage with the world, express ideas, and appreciate beauty. Greek art and architecture continue to be revered and emulated in Roman culture, and Greek literature was studied by Roman poets and playwrights. The influence of ancient Greece can still be seen in the philosophical and political foundations of Western society. Reflecting on the Greek journey, as we approach the end of our journey through ancient Greece, we are left with a culture that revolutionized art, philosophy, politics, and literature. The Athenians' commitment to democracy, the philosophers' search for truth, and the military achievements of Alexander the Great all contribute to the profound legacy of ancient Greece, which continues to influence our world today. The wizard will continue to guide you through this rich tapestry of history, helping you relax and learn as we approach the peaceful conclusion of this historical journey. Their blend of reason and emotion, their pursuit of the ideal form in art and thought, and their emphasis on individual and civic responsibility have had a lasting impact, resonates through centuries of intellectual and cultural development. In the next steps of our journey, we will bring these reflections together, considering how the achievements of ancient Greece paved the way for later civilizations, and their role in shaping the modern world. If you have enjoyed these deeper explorations of ancient Greek culture, consider subscribing